Hello, I am Eva, and welcome to this mechanics breakdown video for Grand Archive TCG, the wonderful anime-style trading card game with Western game design. In this video, I wanted to talk about the effect stack, which is one of the more complex aspects of the game if you're not used to it from other games such as Magic the Gathering. I personally have still been struggling with the complexities of it, and so I figured, what better way to improve my understanding of a thing than to do research, write and read a long script, then visualize it all by animating a whole video about it. Thank you to my friends and especially our favorite judge, Andrew, for checking over this video and answering my obnoxious questions. You guys make these resources possible. So what is the effect stack? The stack, for short, is the invisible zone shared by all players where cards and certain abilities go to be resolved. And it dictates in what order certain events happen and when you can respond to things. In this game, there can be a lot of interaction. You can play cards that prevent damage taken, someone can activate a card and then you can negate that card entirely as if it didn't happen, you can deal damage at fast speed, the list goes on. But it can get confusing. What happens first, the damage dealt to my unit or me preventing that damage? Depending on the order, that unit can die or not. We use the stack to determine exactly how things play out. Just like an ogre, the effect stack is made up of layers. For certain actions when you do them, they become a layer in the effect stack. Each new action adds a layer at the top of the stack. It always goes to the top. And each of these layers waits for its turn to resolve. When a layer resolves, that basically means all players have agreed to let its effects go live. That card or ability will happen, is the essence of it. Keep watching as we'll dive more into detail about resolution later. First, let's go over what kinds of things go and become layers on this effect stack. Number 1, card activations. Typically, these are cards that you play from your hand, though there are exceptions. Number 2, card materializations. Typically, when you play a card from your material deck. Number 3, activated abilities. Many cards have abilities that you can choose to pay some sort of cost to activate whenever you have opportunity to. Here are some examples. Merlin Memory Thief, level 2. The cost is to rest Merlin, turn her sideways. Then the effect is, choose a card from a graveyard and banish it. If that card has floating memory, put a level counter on Merlin. Bubble of Abundance. The cost is to banish it. Then the effect, each player draws a card. And lastly, number 4, there's also triggered abilities. These abilities happen automatically when their condition is fulfilled. Some examples are on enter, on death, on kill, and when cards say something like when, or whenever, or at. Take Airship Captain. Whenever a domain enters the field under your control, deal 2 damage to target champion. So when a new domain hits your field, that deal 2 damage effect will trigger and automatically add itself to the stack. Now that we know what goes on the effect stack, let's discuss exactly how these layers resolve. As a layer is resolving, first, the game will check for the legality of everything involved and what conditions are and aren't met. For example, Song of Nurturing has allies you control get +2 life until end of turn. Class bonus, those allies also get +1 power until end of turn. As this card resolves, the game is going to check whether I meet the class bonus requirement for the second part of the effect, whether my champion's class matches the card's class, which is Tamer. My champion Sylvie passes the test, so yay, the game will allow me to resolve both parts of the effect. So now the effect of the card happens, my allies are sufficiently nurtured. Then, everything involved in this resolution will go where it needs to go. In this case, after this card is done being used, it will go to the graveyard. If I were activating an ally, that would then enter my field. If I were playing a damage spell that kills an ally, both that spell and the dead ally are sent to the graveyard. And that layer that resolved disappears from the stack. So you can almost think of the stack as a temporary holding place until things are approved to go to their final destination. Now, just like how you can only add layers to the top of the stack, the order that layers resolve is also always from the top of the stack. They call it the first in, last out system, meaning that the first thing to enter the stack, aka the bottommost layer, is going to be the last one to resolve. The freshest, newest play will always happen first. Let's simulate a situation to help visualize what all this means. I play Frost Shard to deal 2 damage to my opponent's ally Shimmercloak Assassin, which has a life stat of 2. In response, my opponent plays Reclaim. Return target ally you control to its owner's hand to try to save it. But I really want this thing dead, so I play Freezing Hail to deal another 2 damage, and my opponent doesn't have a response. Here's how the stack is going to resolve. The topmost layer. Freezing Hail deals 2 damage, targeting Shimmercloak Assassin. It only has 2 life, so it's dead and goes to the graveyard. Then the next layer is my opponent's Reclaim. Return target ally to their hand, targeting Shimmercloak Assassin. Whoops, there no longer exists that Shimmercloak Assassin on the field to target. The effect will just fizzle out and nothing happens. And the last remaining layer, Frost Shard, to deal 2 damage targeting Shimmercloak Assassin, which again does not exist, so that will fizzle too. In a little bit, we'll continue discussing layer resolution further and what exactly prompts the stack to start resolving things. So that's how layers leave the stack. Now, how do you determine in what order you can add things to the stack? In this example, it was back and forth between the 2 players. But to explain the complexities of this, we'll have to talk about opportunity. Oh boy, buckle up. Having opportunity in simple terms means that the game allows you to do stuff. The green light is on for you. And opportunity is essentially something that gets passed back and forth between players, though see the fine print in a second. On a more technical level, for the most part, having opportunity means that you have the chance to add something to the stack that is of fast speed. Cards and abilities operate at fast or slow speed. Cards are by default slow, but we'll say fast or fast activation if they can be played at fast speed. Activated abilities can always be done at fast speed unless explicitly stated otherwise. If a card or ability has slow speed, that means those can only be played during your own turn's main phase and when the effect stack is empty, so you won't be able to use those to respond to other things. But fast stuff can go on the stack when there's other layers on it already. There are certain times during the phases of each player's turn that will naturally grant opportunity, but for the purpose of this video, we're not covering that in detail, so here's a list if you want to pause and read it. Wow, wow, things on a list. As for who gets opportunity when, here are some rules. Number 1, the player whose turn it is, aka the turn player, always gets opportunity first. And this is only untrue when, number 2, when a player adds something to the effect stack, they will retain their opportunity. Number 2 basically means that you can keep doing stuff until you don't want to do anything anymore. We usually call it holding opportunity when you do multiple things in a row before passing the ball to your opponent. When you're happy with your moves, you'll pass opportunity on to the other player. Then they can do something and pass opportunity back to you. Now, when does the game know when to start resolving layers on the stack? Well, it's when there's been a full cycle of all players passing opportunity without doing anything. Say you play a card, it goes on the stack, then because you added something to the stack, you will gain opportunity again. But you don't want to do anything else and pass on opportunity to your opponent. Then, if your opponent chooses not to do anything either and passes opportunity as well, that's a whole cycle of nothingness. This is the point where the stack will interpret that as everyone being super happy with the topmost layer and will go ahead and resolve it. This process will repeat until every layer has resolved. Another rule, you generally cannot change the order of layers in the effect stack. However, if you have multiple things hit the stack at the exact same time, you can choose to order them how you like. To be precise, the turn player's triggers will go to the bottom of the stack, then their opponent's above. And each player will order their own triggers however they like. Let's come up with a situation with a bunch of triggers that will happen simultaneously. It's my turn, and we'll pretend I attack using a hypothetical weapon with the ability On Hit, Glimpse 1. Glimpse is a keyword that means I can look at that amount of cards off the top of my deck and put them back in whatever order on the top and or bottom of the deck. Oh, I also happen to have just leveled up into Lorraine level 2 Blade Master, whose attacks get on kill, draw a card. With this attack, I hit and kill my opponent's ally Library Witch, which has On Death, draw a card. All 3 of these triggered abilities, On Kill, On Hit, and On Death, will be triggered at the exact same time, when combat damage is calculated and dealt. As the turn player, any triggers I control go to the bottom of the stack, then my opponent's above them. But I can decide how to order my On Kill and On Hit effects. Of course, I want to look at the top card of my deck before I draw a card, so I'm going to choose to put On Hit Glimpse 1 on top and On Kill draw a card on the bottom. How it resolves, my opponent draws a card, then I glimpse one, then I draw one. Ready to take the complication up a notch? Now we're going to demonstrate some more scenarios that I find interesting for learning the ins and outs of the stack. Here's a new concept. When layers in the stack start resolving, they don't have to continuously keep resolving till it gets to the bottom. Before the stack completely disappears, you can add more to it. After the top layer finishes resolving, the player whose turn it is receives opportunity again, and will have to pass it on to their opponent. Again, it is after the cycle of all players passing on opportunity without action will the next top layer resolve. So let's consider this interaction involving Spellshield Arcane. I would like to send a fireball at my opponent for 8 damage total. Because I added to the stack, I get opportunity again, but pass it to my opponent, who then activates Spellshield Arcane, which has this effect. The next time damage would be dealt to your champion this turn, prevent that damage. Put an amount of Enlighten counters on your champion equal to the amount of damage prevented this way. Opponent will receive opportunity again, and they pass it back to me. I don't want to give my opponent 8 whole Enlighten counters, so here's the play. Instead of taking the opportunity, I will also pass on it. I'll tell my opponent, okay, Spellshield Arcane resolves. Now, Spellshield Arcane's effect is applied to my opponent's champion. They have received a shield, saying that the next time it would be dealt damage, all of it is prevented, etc. And then as the turn player, opportunity is given back to me. Because there are still items pending on the stack, I can keep adding to it. I'm now gonna play Ignite the Soul to ping my opponent's champion for 1 damage. I gain opportunity again and pass it to them. They have nothing to play, so pass it on as well. Topmost layer resolves. Ignite the Soul flicks my opponent for 1. It hits their shield. Now, as the shield dictates, that 1 damage is prevented and they'll receive 1 Uno Enlighten counter. Another round of opportunity, my fireball resolves and they are successfully hit for 8. Now, why was it important to let the Spellshield Arcane resolve first? Let's rewind it and say I played Ignite the Soul in response and added it to the stack above Spellshield Arcane without letting it resolve first. The topmost layer will resolve. Opponent takes 1 damage from the Ignite the Soul. Next, Spellshield Arcane resolves and says that the next damage they take is prevented and gives them Enlighten counters. Now my fireball for 8 becomes that next damage and my whole plan is foiled. Next scenario. It's also important to note that layers on the effect stack will still happen regardless of if its source still exists. My opponent plays a Scavenging Raccoon, which has this triggered ability. On enter, meaning when it enters the field, not when it enters the effect stack. Remember, its activation has to actually resolve for it to enter the field. On enter, banish up to 2 target cards from a single graveyard. Well, this deck I'm playing really cares about the graveyard, so I'm gonna try to stop that effect from happening. First thing that enters the stack is the card activation of the Raccoon itself. I don't want to respond to that because if I did, there would not yet be a fully birthed Raccoon on the field for me to target. So we let the card activation resolve. Raccoon plops onto the field, which triggers its on-enter ability. It will now put the effect, banish up to 2 target cards from a single graveyard, onto the stack. In response to that, I foolishly play Refracting Missile to plink 1 damage to Raccoon. Opportunity passes and that layer will resolve, turning Raccoon into Roadkill. But oh no! Even though its body is gone, the next layer of the stack still remains. My opponent still gets to banish 2 cards from my graveyard. Oops. It can take some experience before being able to recognize if and when abilities get sent to the effect stack. Let's take a look at the card Creative Shock. It says, draw 2 cards, then discard a card. Class bonus. If a fire element card was discarded, you may choose a unit and deal 2 damage to it. When this card is played, how many times is opportunity generated? At what points can you respond? Can you wait to see if your opponent has discarded a fire card before you play a damage prevention spell? The answer is no. It appears like it could be a triggered ability, but it isn't. Unlike statements with when or whenever that are triggered abilities that go onto the stack, the word if doesn't do that. That if clause is a follow-up to the first portion, and they're part of the same effect. It will all resolve at the same time. So there's only 1 instance of opportunity generated here, which is the initial activation of the card. If you want to respond, you'll have to do it as your opponent plays Creative Shock, before your opponent draws and discards their card, without knowing if it's dealing 2 damage or not. Fun fact, getting this wrong in front of a bunch of people at locals is what pushed me over the edge to reform myself through making this video. Remember that when does add to the stack, and if does not. Another good distinction to know is the difference between effects using the word target and the word choose and how they relate to the stack. They sound synonymous but are mechanically different. As you use an effect with target, for example, deal damage to target unit or destroy target item or weapon, you must declare the target thing from the outset as you play your card or as the ability is activated or triggered, and that target cannot change. It's very possible for something to happen to make the thing you declared as your target no longer valid to be targeted by the time the effect actually resolves. If an effect sees that its required target is missing, then too bad, your effect is going to fizzle and not happen. To illustrate, Stifling Trap is a sneaky reaction card with deal 2 damage to target ally, then negate all on-enter triggers from that ally. The scenario is, I activate Dungeon Guide. It resolves, and so its on-enter, banish 2 cards to level up my champion, triggers onto the stack. Oh no, it's a trap! Stifling Trap's effect goes onto the stack, with Dungeon Guide declared as its target. But thankfully, I know how to deal with it. I played Reclaim to return target ally you control to its owner's hand, targeting my Dungeon Guide. No more responses, so we let the stack start resolving. First thing that happens is Reclaim will return Dungeon Guide to my hand. Now, Stifling Trap tries to resolve. Uh-oh, the target ally it's supposed to deal 2 damage to is no longer there. And guess what? The second part also requires that same target, so the negate all on-enter triggers from that ally no longer happens. Yippee! I still get the on-enter ability from the Dungeon Guide. On the flip side, now let's talk about other situations where you need to pick something but it doesn't say target. Many times these effects use the word choose, but not always. In these cases, the things that are chosen are actually declared upon resolution of that effect, rather than at the time it enters the effect stack. Merlin level 2 Memory Thief again has this activated ability. Rest her to choose a card from a graveyard and banish it. If that card has floating memory, put a level counter on Merlin. My opponent Merlin activates this, not needing to declare yet which card they'll be taking from my grave. I do have a Stalwart Shieldmate with floating memory in there that I don't want them to steal, so here's my response. I'll use the activated ability of the Quicksilver Grail I have on the board. Banish it and I can play the card that I kept hidden underneath it, which is a Tithe Proclamation, a regalia that has 1 memory cost. To pay this cost, I'll go ahead and banish that Stalwart Shieldmate myself. Then the rest of Tithe Proclamation resolves, blah blah blah. Now my opponent gets to choose which card to banish from my graveyard. And unfortunately for them, they now have to pick something without floating memory. But at least they still get to banish something. If Merlin's ability said target instead and they declare my Stalwart as their target, they would no longer get the banishing effect. So non-targeting effects do allow you some more flexibility. Here's an example of a time it would matter for you to hold opportunity. In other words, play multiple things in a row before you pass on opportunity. Lightweaver's Assault is a 4 reserve cost fast card that says, reveal all cards in your memory. Choose any amount of units and deal damage equal to the amount of cards revealed this way, split among them. So let's say you're holding 10 cards total in your hand, 2 of which are Lightweaver's Assaults. We'll activate the first copy, putting 4 cards into memory to pay for it. Now that I've added something to the stack, I get opportunity again. Immediately, I'll want to play the second copy of Lightweaver's Assault, putting another 4 cards down. Now we'll pass on opportunity, and our opponent has no response, so we'll go to resolve the topmost Lightweavers. Reveal all cards in your memory. Well, it looks like there's 8 cards in the memory now, so we'll deal 8 damage to the opponent. Another round of opportunity passes by, and the bottommost Lightweavers will resolve. Same thing, another 8 damage. Boom. Beware, though, of making the mistake of playing the first Lightweaver's Assault, then asking if your opponent has a response. That indicates that you've declined to do anything with your opportunity and have passed it to them. If they also do nothing, opportunity will not come back to you right away. That Lightweaver's is going to resolve seeing the 4 cards in memory, dealing only 4 damage to your opponent. Not as cool as 8. I'll add another example based on a mistake that I made a few days ago. I played Frostworn Paladin, which has this on-enter ability. You may banish a card with floating memory from your graveyard. If you do, draw a card and put a buff counter on Frostworn Paladin. The buff counter gives it +1 power and +1 life. My game plan was to respond to the on-enter effect by playing a floating memory card with fast speed so that it would hit the graveyard first. And then Frostworn's on-enter would resolve where I'd banish that floating to make her buff. My opponent, who happened to be Ducats, the 2024 North American National Champion, was playing a wind deck that I was afraid would have Stifling Trap in it that could negate on-enter abilities. So I, in my not national champion state, naively asked, "Am I okay to resolve the on-enter?" He affirmed yes. I was like, yay, no Stifling Trap. I told him my plan, and he very kindly reminded me that if we were in a competitive setting, technically me asking that would have implied that I passed Opportunity. And if he had passed on Opportunity as well, that on-enter would have resolved without me getting a chance to throw Floating Memory into the graveyard first. What I should have done was, after the on-enter effect went onto the stack, I hold Opportunity and play the Floating Memory card immediately, though I would risk being hit by that Stifling Trap. There's unfortunately not really a way around it. We're now approaching the last scenario of the video. Do you feel like you have a grasp on the stack now? If so, I'm glad to hear it. If not, yeah, that's understandable. Well, guess what? There's actually more rules regarding what exactly is added to the stack. Have you ever noticed that sometimes class bonus is written in a black bubble, and sometimes it's just normal bolded text? It's not inconsistency, it actually means something, surprise. Okay, let's discuss this interaction between Tamer Besties Bedivere Woodland Overseer and Alan Beast Beckoner. Bedivere has this triggered ability preceded by 2 restrictions appearing in black ovals. They're called restriction bubbles. These conditions must be met by your champion for the rest of the ability to exist. The restrictions for this effect are class bonus and level 3+. Then, on death, put a buff counter on each animal and/or beast ally you control. Let's say that I'm playing level 2 Alan Beast Beckoner, who has, as long as you control 2 or more animal and/or beast allies, Alan gets +2 level. Currently, my board state is that I have a Bedivere as well as 1 other animal, therefore I'm in total level 4 from Alan's base of level 2 plus another 2 levels for his ability. Oh no, my Bedivere has been killed. Interestingly, in this game, on-death abilities trigger from the field, not upon hitting the graveyard, and it looks at the snapshot of the game when the death happened. So, on Bedivere's dramatic way out, its on-death is triggered, but the game will check if I fulfilled its restrictions before adding it to the stack. Class bonus? Check. Bedivere and Alan are both Tamer class. Level 3+? Check. I'm level 4. The put a buff counter effect goes onto the stack. Okay, the game is done dealing with the on-death, so now Bedivere is actually a goner and moves to the graveyard. We both decline Opportunity, making it time to resolve the layer of Bedivere's on-death ability. At this point, I only have 1 animal on the field, so Alan is back to being level 2. I'm no longer level 3 or higher, so the debate is, does the ability still work? The answer is, yes it does. The restriction bubbles are only there to check whether or not the event or ability can be fired off to the effect stack. The restriction bubbles themselves don't go to the effect stack, so when it's time for that layer to resolve, there are no restrictions to be seen. Now, in comparison, we'll go back to Song of Nurturing. Allies you control get +2 life until end of turn. Class bonus, those allies also get +1 power until end of turn. Notice how the class bonus part is written in regular bolded text, not inside a restriction bubble. This is an appended part of the effect. It's a follow-up to the first section. So that text will be included in what gets sent to the effect stack and would be checked upon resolution. Let's say, hypothetically, I'm Sylvie level 1, a Tamer class champion, and in response to my own Song of Nurturing, for some reason I play Innervate Agility to level down to classless, 0 class, level 0 Spirit of Wind. By the time the layer for Song of Nurturing resolves, I would no longer be a Tamer and would not fulfill Song of Nurturing's Tamer class bonus. The first part of the effect would still happen, but the second part would be kaput. And we've reached the end. I hope you perhaps learned a few things about the effect stack in Grand Archive. Heck, I hope that I remember everything I wrote for this video. Other places you can find me, I'm on a podcast called Talk GA where we talk about anything and everything Grand Archive, and my main channel is where I do singing covers. Thanks so much for watching and happy stacking!